Republicans fire back.
Things are going to be better when this bill passes and becomes law.
The Trump administration responds to criticism of the Obamacare replacement bill. Catholicism at the Capitol.
Are you a Catholic first or are you a Democrat first? Are you a Catholic first or are you Republican first?
My one-on-one conversation with new Representative Brad Wenstrup from Ohio on his Catholic faith, abortion coverage, and the new health care plan. Fight against ISIS.
And this is what I feel more clear with this administration.
A priest's hope for stopping violence in the Middle East and what the White House should do. And the beauty of faith. We'll analyze artwork from a must-see exhibit at the National Gallery of Art. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, March 14th, 2017. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. The Trump administration blasts a congressional budget report that predicts 14 million people will lose their health care coverage in the next year under the Republican plan to replace Obamacare. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee will bring us reaction from the White House. But first, Jason Calvi reports from Capitol Hill, where the new report also zeroes in on Planned Parenthood. Jason.
Lauren, the House Obamacare bill would strip Planned Parenthood's federal funds for 1 year. The nonpartisan report predicts that will result in thousands of more births because they say some women would no longer have access to care. Pro-life activists say a price tag, though, can't be placed on life. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office predicts 15% of women in rural or low-income areas would lose access to care if Planned Parenthood loses funding. Because of that, the report estimates several thousand more births will result.
I actually think an increase in births is a good thing.
As a guy who's pro-life, that actually recommends it. I mean, it's kind of grisly to think that that would be a criticism, huh? Very grisly.
Democrats defend the group's funding.
Teen pregnancies are at their lowest point ever, and that has, I believe, a lot to do with the fact that young women can now get counseling. They understand and can get family planning services.
But Republicans say other organizations that don't provide abortions will pick up the slack. In fact, pro-life research group Charlotte Lozier Institute says across the country there are 20 community health centers to every one Planned Parenthood clinic. And pro-life pregnancy resource centers around the country say they're already saving taxpayers millions of dollars by providing help and medical care to women in need.
I hate to refer to the issue of abortion through an economic lens because one life is worth more than the whole world, okay? We're saving the taxpayers a whole lot of money here.
The CBO says the several thousand extra births paid for by Medicaid would cost $21 million this year, but the defunding of Planned Parenthood will slash government spending by $178 million this year. Lauren?
Jason, how much money does Planned Parenthood face losing?
Well, federal dollars make up nearly half of Planned Parenthood's annual billion-dollar budget. They're reimbursed by Medicaid for non-abortion services. A previous Congressional Budget Office report predicted they would lose nearly $400 million in 1 year of defunding.
Jason Calvi, correspondent Jason Calvi on Capitol Hill. Thank you, Jason. Democrats say the new health care report should be a knockout blow to the effort to repeal and replace Obamacare. But Republicans aren't backing down. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reports from the White House. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. White House Budget Chief Mick Mulvaney blasts the Congressional Budget Office's report, saying they got the facts wrong. He says they made bad assumptions about the Republican replacement plan that led to bizarre numbers.
It's just absurd.
OBM Chief Mick Mulvaney and Health Secretary Tom Price slamming the Congressional Budget Office's findings.
We believe that the plan that we're putting in place is going to insure more individuals than currently are insured. So we think that CBO simply has it wrong.
And House Speaker Paul Ryan says by looking at all of the report's numbers, healthcare premiums in the long run are expected to decrease by at least 10%. But the CBO report says by 2018, 14 million fewer people will be covered. And by 2026, that number climbs to 24 million. The White House has been downplaying the report for days, saying the agency previously reported incorrect numbers for Obamacare. but Democrats say the report is proof that poorer Americans would be worse off under the Republican bill.
The only winners in this CBO report are health insurance executives and the wealthiest Americans.
The White House disagrees, pointing to its plan to use tax credits to help consumers buy health coverage, phase out an expansion of Medicaid, and scrap a number of taxes.
We really do think that these ideas of taking market competition, putting it back into healthcare, getting government out of the way, will do what it does in healthcare, what it does with everything else.
Republican leaders show no signs of overhauling their bill, but this report may make it harder to convince skeptical Republicans like Ohio Representative Jim Jordan. He and other conservatives are pushing the White House to make changes. Lauren?
Why is the White House open to making those changes?
Well, yes, Lauren, the president and the vice president have met with lawmakers, conservative think tanks, and pro-life groups. It appears, though, they aren't budging on the biggest principles in the bill, but they are willing to talk about aspects like how fast to phase out parts of Obamacare. Lauren?
Wyatt Goolsbee, thank you. Health care reform faces challenges in both the House and Senate. Joining us now is Representative Brad Wenstrup, a Republican from Ohio. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
What is going to happen with the pro-life language in the House bill that bans these tax credits for health plans offering abortion coverage? Do you think it's going to make it through the Senate?
Well, that's going to be one of the challenges that we have to face. You know, first of all, let's be clear, abortion is not health care. I think we know that and recognize that. I'm not sure that everyone on the Senate side recognizes it in the way that we do. The House will have no problem, I think, in putting these provisions into the bill. And I don't think the White House has a problem with it. The Senate will have some concerns, and part of it may just be parliamentary more than anything else, which doesn't mean that we can't fight for some of these provisions later in regular legislation, which is part of the whole health care reform. But the question will be, can we get that to 60 votes? In reconciliation, we want to get as many of these provisions in as we possibly can that will be allowed by the Senate parliamentarian, because then you only need 50 votes.
A little complicated, but I think I got it. What happens if it doesn't pass the Senate?
Yes.
Where do you go?
Well, that's a good question. I think that we're all going to be faced with that. And if you just look at the health care bill in general, something has to be done. Because if you look at the situation with the exchanges, the providers are dropping off. Humana and Anthem are dropping out for 18. And so there'll be places that have nothing on the exchange, and yet people under this law will still be penalized if they don't choose to join the exchange. So we've got a lot of changes to make. We have an opportunity to get pro-life provisions in there that we have been working for so many years, and I hope that we can see that through, especially through reconciliation. Let's grab as much as we possibly can to save lives by doing it through reconciliation where we can get the votes in the Senate.
Here at EWTN, we cover a lot about Christian persecution. We'll have a report from Rome later about that. We also have somebody in studio. As an Iraq War veteran, you're a member of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, and you're on the House Armed Services Committee. Why don't you tell us from your viewpoint what you think needs to be done to protect Americans and maintain the image of America as a safe haven for people fleeing war and religious persecution?
Well, I also just spent some time in the Middle East and was able to spend some time with Syrian refugees that were actually in Jordan, some that survived brutal attacks from the Syrian army. But we are a nation of immigrants and always have been. But I think it's important that we make sure that our vetting process is in place as we try to take care of people and do as much as we can overseas and help people in their own land with refugee camps.
Really quickly before we have to go, we're asking all new Catholic congressmen the role that faith plays in your work on Capitol Hill.
Well, to me, it means a lot. You know, there was a homily that I heard just recently here in Washington, D.C. that really hit home. And Father talked about the values of Catholics that have been there since the beginning of time, such as being against abortion and being in favor of life. But he asked the congregation, are you a Catholic first or are you a Democrat first? Are you a Catholic first or are you Republican first? And I think as Catholics, we need to keep that in mind. You know, there's no doubt about it. This country was founded on a religious foundation, so there is nothing wrong with having religion be a part of your legislative process.
Very good. Representative Brad Wenstrup, Republican from Ohio. We hope to see more of you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. You bet.
The Catholic Conference of Bishops in Hawaii opposes a bill to allow assisted suicide. State senators approved the measure, which now heads to the House of Representatives for debate. 5 states already allow assisted suicide. Catholic bishops say they are working to uphold the sanctity of life. The top Marine says he intends to fix problems that led to a scandal over nude photos. Current and former Marines shared pictures of female Marines online, but some members of the Senate Armed Services Committee think that there's more to the story.
And I don't think it's confined to the Marine Corps. But obviously we've been dealing with this for a number of years, and this is very, very discouraging.
This is a problem in the civilian world where people take photos in an intimate relationship and they get mad and they share it. But in the military, this can't happen because you destroy good order and discipline.
On the Facebook page, Marines also made lewd and threatening comments about women. 8 current and former Navy officials, including an admiral, are charged in a bribery scandal. The Washington Post says the group is accused of taking bribes in the form of gifts, hotels, and prostitutes from a Singapore defense contractor. A late winter storm leaves more than a foot of snow in the Northeast. The powerful nor'easter grounded more than 6,000 flights, knocked out power to more than 180,000 people, and closed schools, including my children, from Washington to Boston. The White House became even whiter with a few inches of snow around 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. It all comes less than a week before spring. Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. North Korea warns of merciless strikes in response to joint military drills between the United States and South Korea. It accuses the U.S. of planning a preemptive strike. Warships from the U.S., South Korea, and Japan started drills to improve their capability to shoot down missiles. The Trump administration is searching for ideas to stop North Korea's missile program in ways that sanctions and diplomatic isolation have failed to do. The Canadian bishops challenge plans for Canada to spend $650 million on sexual and reproductive health rights worldwide. They say the money could be used to battle pro-life laws. In a letter to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, CCCB President Bishop Douglas Crosby says such a policy is a reprehensible example of Western cultural imperialism, an attempt to impose misplaced but so-called Canadian values to other nations and people. Bishops in Mexico launch a social media campaign to counter the effects of President Trump's immigration policy. The Mexican Bishops' Conference calls the possibility of separating families unacceptable. It uses the hashtag El Migrante es un don, or the migrant is a gift. They encourage all to use the grace of Lent to better understand the difficult situation. And a cardinal in Rome says Christian persecution and suffering can strengthen the church by giving our faith more depth. Vatican correspondent Mary Shovlin joins us from Rome. Mary, welcome. You sat down with Cardinal Joseph Tomko, who headed the Vatican's Office for Missions for 16 years. Tell us the Cardinal's analysis about the plight of Christians today.
Lauren, first of all, let me say what an honor what it was just to sit down with Cardinal Tomko. 71 years just here in Rome. He's 93 years old, just turned 93 this past Saturday, but his wealth of experience, when you talk about someone who has been to peripheries of the Catholic Church, he has been there. And many of these places where Christians are losing their lives just because they called themselves Christians. I asked him to weigh in on that. I asked him his thoughts on the current situation of Christians are being persecuted. Here's what he had to say.
The persecution is helping the church. When you feel without no problems, also no sufferance, then you are sometimes without this depth.
Lauren, an interesting perspective, I think, from Cardinal Tomko there, one that gives us hope. And he added at the end, he said, you know, suffering is good for our human nature. He said, but I just pray that the Lord doesn't send us too much suffering.
The Pope has made that his prayer intention this month. What is he asking to do?
Well, he's asking all of us around the world, first of all, to pray where people are being persecuted for their faith. We've seen the Pope's prayer video maybe already for this month, but he asks a question in that video that I think maybe has gone past our ears, so to speak. He's asking us, Are you praying for Christians who are being persecuted for their faith, for everyone who's being persecuted unjustly for their faith? So first of all, are we praying for them? And then he asked us all to not only accompany him with prayer, but do what we can with material support on the ground or locally or however we can to help them, not only with our prayer, but material as well. And we remember at the end of the Pope's retreat this past Sunday, he himself made a gift of 100,000 euro on behalf of himself and those who work with him here in the Vatican of 100,000 euro destined to those who are suffering in Syria. So not only is he encouraging us to do more, he's showing us how.
Mary, we'll have much more on the Christian persecution issue later in the broadcast. Mary Shevlin, EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent. Thanks, Mary.
Thank you, Lauren.
Coming up, my one-on-one conversation with Father Andre Mahana. He shares his mission to protect religious minorities from genocide.
It will save the Muslims, the Christians, the Jews.
And path to sainthood. We remember the first martyr born in the United States. The Deputy Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia visits the White House today. He is the first Arab and Muslim leader to meet with the president at the White House. His focus is to discuss, among other things, the price of oil and energy and all Mideast conflicts. As Christian refugees struggle in the Middle East to rebuild their lives, a Denver priest is in Washington asking U.S. leaders to step up support. Joining us now is Father Andre Mahana, the U.S. President for the Apostolic Union of Clergy and a pastor at a Catholic church in Colorado. Welcome back to the program.
Thank you so very much for having me for the second time.
It's the second time. You're in Washington now meeting with the White House and members of Congress. What are you trying to get them to do?
What's right? Save Christian Middle East, save America.
And what does that mean specifically?
Specifically, it means creation of a joint congressional resolution supporting, prioritizing immigration for religious minorities who are really persecuted harshly. That it's time for United States to, since we have two resolutions already, Resolution 75, acknowledging that there has been a genocide. We want this current administration to beautifully move towards implementing the content of this resolution. It will save the Muslims, the Christians, the Jews. It will give the right to the innocent people to receive justice again. And two, meeting with related committees and staff members, both the House and the Senate, in order to enhance in them that religious freedom is key in the 21st century.
Religious freedom here in the United States, I understand. What are your sources telling you is happening in Lebanon and in the Middle East right now?
There is a major shift amongst Christians in the Middle East and in Lebanon. There is a complete, almost like there is a mistrust being happening.
Why?
Because there is a history of failure, unfortunately, in our behavior as a government and our behavior as a people. We are too much misconceived as Americans. What is it that we're doing in the Middle East? Christians stopped knowing. What are we doing in the Middle East? What is the purpose of our engagement? Are we there for oil? Are we there for principles, to save people's lives, to allow coexistence between people?
I think it's to fight ISIS, don't you?
We hope so, yes. And this is what I feel more clear with this administration, that the president has asked in the very first 100 days of his administration, he needs a clear plan how to defeat and how to fight ISIS.
Well, this executive order on refugees does not now give a specific exemption for Christians who are persecuted. Do you think that's the right move?
Is it the right move? I hope it's not the final move. I cannot judge if it's the right or wrong. I can only say I do believe that this country is under attack. I do believe the president has the right to really secure the borders and secure this nation, but things cannot stop here. We have gotten engaged too much, too far down inside the Middle East. That's why we have Bishop Elias Zaiden with us here in Washington, D.C. He's coming as a voice to plead on behalf of the immigrants from Lebanon who came during the war, that if this executive order does not seek in itself adjusting the status of many Christians who came from Lebanon since 1975 till today, then there will be trouble with that executive order. These are people who pay taxes, they supported every administration came, they are good, faithful citizens, and they need somebody to speak on their behalf.
Father Andre Mahana, thank you so much for joining us. You're the president for the Apostolic Union of Clergy and a pastor at St. Rafka Maronite Catholic Church in Colorado.
Thank you so very much.
The Knights of Columbus gives nearly $2 million to support persecuted Christians from Syria and Iraq. Supreme Knight Carl Anderson says they've raised more than $12 million for Christian refugees since 2014. The first recognized martyr born in the United States will soon be one step away from canonization. Father Stanley Rother was born in Oklahoma and served as a priest in Guatemala. He'll be beatified in Oklahoma City in September of this year. In December last year, Pope Francis officially acknowledged Father Rother's martyrdom. To read more on the life of Father Rother, visit our partners at CatholicNewsAgency.com. Up next, the beauty of faith, how sacred art comes to life. And growth opportunity. Squatters take over a piece of church property in Rome. Luca della Robbia was a 15th century Italian sculptor whose glazing technique for terracotta endures as a rich example of Renaissance art. An exhibit of his work is currently on display here in Washington at the National Gallery of Art. I sat down earlier for a look at some of the pieces. Joining us now is Jem Sullivan, author of The Beauty of Faith. Welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Lauren.
We're going to talk about some beautiful pictures today. One of the works in this exhibit is called The Visitation, and looking at it, it shows the Virgin Mary and her cousin Elizabeth. You can just feel, it's almost palpable, the deep bond that they have.
Absolutely, Lauren. This is one of the stunning works in this exhibit, titled Della Robbia, Sculpting with Color in Renaissance Florence. And The Visitation is the work of Luca della Robbia. He was sort of the grandfather of the whole family of artists, and he brings together these two women, Mary, who has just received the Annunciation, who comes in haste to meet her cousin Elizabeth. And it's in clay, and clay is a humble element. It's the earth, really. But in Luca della Robbia's hands, clay begins to sing, because you can almost hear these two women singing the praises of God.
It looked like marble, though, to me. I was just looking at it. So it's clay with something on top of it?
It's painted terracotta.
Painted terracotta.
And he deliberately chooses white for simplicity, of course, the simplicity of these two women.
And virginity.
That's right, and the purity and virginity of Mary. But it's really the sense in which these two women come together, and what they're doing is singing the praises of God, and you can hear it. The sculptures are just so beautifully intertwined.
You can really see the beauty of faith in this other one, the adoration of the Christ child. How do you think that he achieved that?
You know, Luca della Robbia was an innovator, a true innovator of the Renaissance, and they actually do not know the family secrets of their techniques of sculpting and glazing these terracotta sculptures. This is a beautiful scene of the adoration of the Christ child. We see the Madonna kneeling before the baby Jesus, and what's wonderful is that the baby Jesus reaches out and gives his mother a blessing.
I love that arm. Look at that. Yeah, it's lovely.
And that just shows you the beauty of these scenes from the Gospels, which is what makes this exhibit so rare and such a treat, because it really is sacred art come to life.
I drive down Constitution Avenue and I've seen the big banner talking about this exhibit. Another must-see piece of the exhibit is a glazed terracotta piece, again, called The Resurrection of Christ.
That's right. This is the piece that actually welcomes visitors into the exhibit. It's over the doorway of the exhibit, so you can't miss it. It's right there. And it's just a monumental, stunning work of Renaissance art. At the center of the composition is Jesus, risen on Easter Sunday morning, and all around him the guards are sort of thrown to the ground. But there's a family, a patron, the person who commissioned the work of art, who's kneeling in prayer before the risen Lord. What's really fascinating is that the same family that commissioned the work in the 15th century in Florence is now supporting this exhibit 26 generations later.
Wow,
yes.
That is impressive. So you and I need to go walking through this exhibit. I want to hear more. Thank you so much, Jem Sullivan, author of The Beauty of Faith.
You're most welcome.
Dozens of families are hitting the farm as they plant their first crops as squatters on Catholic church property. They're not entirely legal. Urban gardens sprung up on the eastern edge of Rome, and for the past 4 years, a group has been working the 37 acres of abandoned land. They've cleared it of garbage and rocks, installed a well-fed irrigation system, and turned the land into fertile plots for needy families to farm. Now, the Pope seems to be okay with it. He asked his chief almsgiver to keep tabs on the garden. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, I'm Lauren Ashburn. Thank you for joining us. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter for behind-the-scenes looks at News Nightly. We're going to leave you with what we're seeing out our window, a look at the sloppy winter weather here in Washington, D.C. Good night, and God bless.